But before we get to that, and before we start on the book, I have to introduce to them the third component in Greeks versus Trojans, the Trojan War, which is the gods. And here they are on a Mount Olympus, my Mount Olympus, which looks a little like Kilimanjaro, with a bit of snow on it, and some lovely temples built by the god Hephaestus himself, comfortable accommodation up there. And there is Zeus looking a little haggard, all the trouble he has to go to try and hide his affairs with mortals from his wife, Mrs. Zeus, Hera, who's, I think, looking suitably suspicious there. I think she's come off rather well. And he is the biggest cheese of all. He gets a large mouse. And he is supposed to be the even-handed referee in this contest, but it's very difficult for him to be a referee because many of his sons are actually fighting, and he doesn't like to see them die. And many are the appeals made by different gods to Zeus to rule in their favor, either for the Trojans or for the Greeks. Apollo wants him to rule, to give advantage to the Trojans. Apollo, who is referred to in the opening lines as Smintheus, which means mouse exterminator, and it does seem as if the Apollo cult began as a mouse cult in a distant part of what is now Greece. And he is still addressed as he who can get rid of your mice for you. Apollo, who shoots arrows from afar. He is the god of distance bridging, perhaps of distance learning. If we had distance learning, it should be named after Apollo. And to go into his birth and the birth of his sister Artemis would take us too much time, and Artemis is not so crucial in this story as Apollo is on the Trojan side. Aphrodite too, who most people have heard of in some form of another, Venus as she will become in the Roman version, and she is a friend to Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, must have the goddess of beauty on her side, and that's important. And the chief goddess, she's almost half male, half man, half woman really, although technically she's a woman, Athena, goddess of wisdom and also to some extent of war, who becomes Minerva in Roman times, a much less powerful figure than she was as Athena of the Greeks, and her presiding token or familiar or form is an owl. And since my owl usually comes out looking like a cockatoo, I have to write owl next to it so that people recognize what I'm talking about. And Athena, maybe that's where the Parthenon gets a little moment on the board there, explaining that she was the goddess who underwrote the classical age in Greece. She was their number one goddess, and it's her shrine that you can see. If you go to the Parthenon, you climb the Acropolis, you will find, there's not much left of it actually, but there was a shrine to Athena. So they depend hugely on Athena, who as Zeus's offspring has a special path to Zeus, although same can be said of Apollo, but she is special because, as I explain, she is born from the head of Zeus. One of Zeus's more ludicrous ruses to fool Mrs. Zeus that he hadn't had an affair. He spontaneously produced this miraculous child in a process known, another great word, as parthenogenesis. And parthenogenetic is a word you can safely drop, knowing that nobody will understand what you're talking about. But that describes the birth of Athena from in there, and hence her, the big cheese's special love for her. And on the whole, I think we know that because of that, no matter what any of the other gods, Ares, the god of war, and Poseidon, who also makes several appearances in the Iliad, we know that Athena is probably going to come out on top in some form. Besides which, there is a prophecy that that draw some flames here. Flames that poor old Troy is destined to fall, and will take with it poor old King Priam and a number of other people, which we do not see in the Iliad, which doesn't go all the way to the end, and you have to look in order to find out what actually happened to Troy at the Odyssey or at other fragments that we have where you discover to your amazement, and I know this is a spoiler alert, but that of all surprising things, Helen of Troy goes back to being Helen of Argos and winds up serving dinner again in Argos at Menelaus' palace. So this terrible saga comes to a horrible end with flames destroying this magnificent city, leaping up and taking the people with it, flames leaping out of there and there and there. And down comes Troy, and poor old Priam dies. Hector and Achilles fight, and that's the climax of the Iliad, is the disgraceful behavior of our greatest Greek warrior, Achilles, once he's killed the greatest Trojan warrior, and drags him around this plain behind his chariot and leaves lasting shame behind him, although we're also given to understand that since Achilles is one of the sons of Zeus, that there is a godlike, inhuman aspect to his rage, which we need to understand and perhaps accept. But after Homer's story, these various kings, Ulysses famously in the Odyssey, make their way back home, those who can, those who are able to find their way home. Ajax, the strongest man in the Greek army, goes mad and fights the sea, and the others are lost for a long time. Agamemnon goes home to be killed by his wife for having sacrificed their daughter, and for many things, but among them for having sacrificed their daughter in order to get a fair wind for these ships to arrive here to spend 10 years attacking Troy. Menelaus, however, goes home, the man who lost his wife to Paris, and he goes home happily and takes Helen home, as though, in a sense, nothing had happened. And really nothing could argue the absurdity and vanity and emptiness of this war than the fact that everybody else dies, but the people who started just go home, as though nothing had happened. So a terrible story, and a story well worth listening to, and wondering whether the big cheeses aren't still up there on Olympus watching us and organizing just how our wars end.